Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back for day 8 of Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers. So we got a lot of interesting cards to talk about today. We got a bunch of new rares and mythics to talk about. But before we dive in, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Murders of Karlov Manor spoiler season. And we'll be on a top 10 list in just a couple of days for our mythics and rares, and then also for our commons and our uncommons. We'll be doing some top 10 list as well. So let's dive into Murders at Karlov Manor. So our first card of the day is Yarus, Roar of the Gods. For 2, a red and a green mana, you get a legendary creature that's a centaur druid and a 4/4. Other creatures you control have haste. Whenever one or more face down creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Whenever a face down creature you control dies, if it's a permanent card, return it to the battlefield face up under its owner's control, then turn it face up. So very powerful card here. I think one of the most powerful cards from the set. And this is really the first card that I've seen that's a true payoff for our disguise and our cloak abilities. Because Yarus is going to basically, if they're on the field, he's on the field, you lose one of those in combat or to removal, it dies and it comes back to the battlefield and then it flips for you. So pretty powerful ability overall. But what I'm most excited about the card is its haste ability for other creatures, because one of the things that right now I'm looking at, our potential Gruul deck, given that we got Azorius, our 8/4 for 4 mana, mole god. And I'm looking at that card, trying to figure out how to make it work. And this is the card that makes it work. Because you can play this on turn 4, you play that on turn 5, and now he's going to be able to immediately attack in 8 power, potentially for damage that will end the game. And that's why I think those two cards are really going to synergize well together. And I think we're going to have a really powerful and interesting Gruul deck that may be built around haste cards that are allowing Yarus and our mole god Azorius to get in quickly for damage. And this also will help with some of our dinosaurs as well. So we'll be able to pick and choose from those as well. And that will also help us kind of speed through our deck and deal a lot of damage early in the game, which we really do need another more aggressive deck in the format for best of 3. And I think this is a card that's going to make that possible. Next, we've got Incinerator of the Guilty. For 4, 2 red, you get a dragon that's a 6/6 with flying and trample, and whenever Incinerator of the Guilty deals combat damage to a player, you may collect evidence X. When you do, Incinerator of Guilt deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker that player controls. So incredibly powerful ability on Incinerator of Guilt. And we've seen something similar to this in the past for 7 mana. So it wasn't quite good enough for standard, but I think this is good enough for standard, especially in potentially that Gruul deck we were just talking about, because we're going to have a way to haste it in, and it's got trample, so you're going to deal damage to your opponent. And as a result of that, if your opponent can't remove it right away, you get to attack with it. Their side of the board is going to be pretty devastated after Incinerator of Guilt hits the board and is able to deal that damage. And we also, I think, have a potential deck that we're going to see in Standard that's going to be a red flyer deck, because we got a couple of good red flyers. We got another one we'll talk about in a couple minutes, but we got a lot of good red flyers from the last couple of sets, and I think we're getting almost to that point where even though they're not haste creatures, there's enough good evasive red flyers that we can pair it with another color, and I think have a pretty interesting deck for Standard. Next, we've got 10th District Hero. For 1 and a white mana, you get a human that's a 2/3. And for 1 and a white mana, you can collect evidence 2, and 10th District Hero becomes a human detective with base power and toughness of 4/4 and gains vigilance. And then for 2 and a white mana, you get to collect evidence 4. If 10th District Hero is a detective, it becomes a legendary creature named Mileva, a stalwart hero with base power and toughness 5/5, and other creatures you control have indestructible. Wow. The question about this one is, are you going to be able to collect the evidence? It's an incredibly powerful card, and it's a human. And we already have the solid best of one mono white humans deck, and it's also, we're seeing some Boros humans as well. So this card slots incredibly well into both of those decks, and as long as you can collect the evidence, you're going to be able to make it a 4/4 with vigilance, and then if you can collect that 4 evidence, then everything you've got on the board has indestructible. And that, unless your opponent is playing exile spells, there's nothing they can do to stop your side of the board from just attacking in and doing damage, and your creatures surviving and your opponent's creatures dying. So this is potentially one of the best cards from this set, assuming that we're able to collect that evidence to make this work in Standard. And I think it can do well in other formats as well, because the collect evidence ability is the only downside of this. If it's just pumping mana into it, this would be a bonkers powerful card. And we have already seen over the last, couple of years, in black, we've seen a card similar to this. You just pump mana into it, and it grows as time goes on. We've seen it in blue before, so I think that this is a very good card, and I think it's going to see a tremendous amount of Standard play. Next, we've got Officious Interrogator. For 1 white mana and a blue mana, you get an instant, and this spell costs additional white and additional blue more to cast for each target beyond the first. Choose any number of target players, investigate X times, where X is the total number of creatures those players control. So this is an incredibly powerful spell in the right kind of deck. And I think what we're likely to see this in is certainly as a sideboard card in any Azorius control build or Esper control deck we have, because being able to create all those investigate tokens will be very powerful, because they're just going to want additional card draw. So given that, in Standard, I think it has a place, definitely at least as a sideboard card. Now, where this is going to shine is Commander, where you're playing a multiplayer game, and because you're playing that multiplayer game, you just have to invest the additional white and blue mana each time you want to add one of your opponents to the mix to get additional investigate tokens. So good card, gonna see play definitely in Standard and beyond. Next, we've got one of our more interesting cards of the day, Expedited Inheritance. For 2 red mana, you get an enchantment, and whenever a creature is dealt damage, its controller may exile that many cards from the top of their library. They may play those cards until the end of their next turn. So this is a weird card, and we've seen cards like this before in Standard, and it is at Mythic, so that leads me to believe that some of the playtesting that they've done shows that this is a good card, but I'm really suspicious of it from the standpoint that if as a mono red player, I'm probably not going to want this in my deck, because my job is to go fast, hit the opponent as quickly as possible, drain them of their 20 life, and be done with them. But I think where this may have some playability is in an Is It deck or another kind of deck where your creatures are dealt damage, and you'll get the benefit of getting some cards. Now, again, the downside is your opponent gets that same ability. So it's whenever a creature is dealt damage, so in combat both creatures are going to be dealt damage, so both controllers are going to get to exile that many cards from the top of their library. So it might help you in the long run, but I think this is a card that is just a little too suspicious for me to think that it's going to have Standard playability. Next, we've got Krenko's Buzz Crusher for 2 and 2 red mana, you get an artifact creature that's an Insectopter. It's a 4/4. It has flying and trample. And when Krenko's Buzz Crusher enters the battlefield, for each player, destroy up to 1 non-basic land that player controls. For each land destroyed this way, its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle. So, interesting 4 mana spell here. You get the benefit of basically having a Field of Ruin on a creature where it destroys one of their non-basic lands. So I like that ability because, even if your opponent kills it right away, you get that benefit of maybe killing one of their creature lands. And I think in Standard, if there is either a mid-range mono red deck or a mono red flyer deck forms, and I can see, potentially an Is It Flyers deck here, that this is going to be a card they want in it because, the reality in Standard right now is lots of people are playing 2 and 3 colors. They're playing creature lands. They're playing important lands that you want to be able to destroy. And this card's going to do that for you and then leave a body behind. And normally that costs 2 mana. So the way I'm looking at this card is, well, it's really 2 red mana for your 4/4. So that's a pretty good value in Standard. So I like this card a lot, and I can see it seeing Standard playability. Don't know if it's going to be really a mono red shell, but I think there's a deck out there for it. Next, we've got Wisp Drinker Vampire for 2, a white and a black mana. We get a Vampire Rogue that has flying and is a 2/4. And whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And for 5, a white and a black mana, creatures you control with power 2 or less gain Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. So very interesting uncommon here that I think definitely is going to be a good card in Limited. And really all the cards we've talked about today are going to be good cards in Limited. So I highly advise all of them except for our Red Enchantment, which I still don't know what exactly that one's going to be able to do in Standard. But the big thing here is this is a vampire, and it has the benefit of anytime you're playing a 2 power creature or less, you're going to gain a life. Your opponent loses a life, so you get that drain ability. So I think this could be, kind of a nice card that not necessarily is the top end of a deck, but a nice 4-drop in the deck that has a consistent ability that can trigger, and you can gain life and your opponent loses life. And don't sleep on the 7 mana to give everything Death Touch and Lifelink either, because if you play this in a go wide deck, then potentially you pay that 7 mana when you reach it and all your creatures have Lifelink and Death Touch, and potentially you could even turn a game around in that situation because you're going to be able to attack in with all those creatures and gain life, kill anything that blocks those creatures is going to die, and that's going to have a significant shift in the board state in your favor. Next, we've got Coveted Falcon for 1 and 2 blue mana. You get a artifact creature that's a bird. It's a 1/4 with flying, and whenever Coveted Falcon attacks, gain control of target permanent you own but don't control. It has Disguise 1 and a blue mana, and whenever Coveted Falcon is turned face up, target opponent gains control of any number of target permanents you control. Draw a card for each one they gained control of this way. So very interesting ability. This is definitely meant to be a card that you're going to cast face down, and then you flip it for its 2 mana disguise cost, and then you get the benefit of giving your opponent stuff that you probably don't want, and then each time you attack with Coveted Falcon, you get one of those things back. And it's a weird card to me. Now, I think it probably has some limited playability, but I'm really not sure about Standard because giving up your stuff in Standard generally is not a good idea. So I think this is not going to see much, if any, standard play. Unless we've got a deck that really wants to draw cards and can gain life from it. I could see potentially this, kind of working with Shealdra a little bit, get a lot of life gain. But again, I don't think it's got much standard playability. Next, we've got a couple lower rarity cards for the day that I want to talk about. And the first is Call a Surprise Witness for 1 and a white mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield and put a flying counter on it. It's a spirit in addition to its other types. So right now we already have a deck built around this ability because we got a similar card in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, but it was 1 mana. But I like this one because for 2 mana you get the same ability, but you also get the additional value of getting that flying counter on that creature that you're bringing back from the graveyard. So because of that, I think this easily fits into that deck, and it's going to see play there. But I can also see it in any kind of low to the ground strategy deck where you've got good quality creatures, some of them are going to die, and this is a great way to bring them back and then get that additional benefit of the flying counter on it, which can turn around games pretty quickly. Next, we've got Insidious Roots for a black and a green mana. You get an enchantment, and creature tokens you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color. Whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 0/1 green plant creature token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. So I think this is potentially a very powerful card, even in standard. Definitely in limited, I think it's a good card, but I think this has the potential to be a very powerful card in standard if we get a deck where we're going to be able to remove cards from graveyards consistently, and definitely we have to have the 1 or more of our own cards leave. But black already has several cards that do this. We've got the Graveyard Trespasser that does this, and we've got a couple other cards in black that do the same thing. So I think meeting the requirement of that is not going to be hard. And then also we can create other token creatures in this. So I think meeting the requirement of it is not going to be all that difficult. And then every time you remove a creature card from your graveyard or leaves your graveyard, whether that's for a collect evidence ability or any other reason, then I think it's going to be really, really powerful. And again, it's going to be building the right deck around it, but I like this card. I think it has standard playability. Next, we've got Runebrand Juggler for a black and a red mana. You get a human shaman. That's a 2/2. And when Runebrand Juggler enters the battlefield, suspect up to 1 target creature you control. A suspected creature has menace and cannot block. And for 3, a black and a red mana, you can sacrifice a suspected creature, and target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. So I like this card 2-drop. It does something when it comes into play. You can suspect it, make it evasive, or make one of your other creatures evasive. And I think that's a nice enter the battlefield ability. And as a result of that, I'm not sure if right now Rakdos decks are going to want this, but I think over time this will be an ability that they will want to consider having in their decks. So I think it has some standard playability. Definitely a good card in limited. Next we have Sanguine Savior for 1, a white and a black mana. You get a Vampire Cleric. That's a 2/1. It has flying and lifelink. It also has Disguise for a hybrid Azorius Manor and another hybrid Azorius Manor. And when Sanguine Savior is turned face up, another target creature you control gains lifelink until the end of the turn. So this is a very interesting card. The flying and the lifelink I like a lot. It is 3 mana. It's only a 2/1. But the fact that you could flip it up, you can gain life, you can make it evasive at that point and kind of change some blocking math for your opponent. Maybe you do this right before blocks are declared, and your opponent thinks, I've got it, and now this flies over. It starts the life gain, and that's really helpful to you. And we also have a dedicated life gain deck in Standard right now. It's not seeing a lot of best of 3 play, but there is a pretty decent cleric deck out there that I feel like this is just another good card that slots into that. And we've got Amelia, who also is a card that kind of works in that deck, and we've got a couple of other cards that work really well in that deck. So I think this has a chance to be another quality card in that deck that can help lead that deck to a better position in Standard. Next, we've got Gnarling Gorehound. For a black mana, you get a dog with menace that's a 1/1, and whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, surveil 1. Now, normally 1-drops that are 1/1, okay, not anything really flashy or pretty vanilla card here, but it also has menace and it has that surveil ability. In black, being able to surveil is going to be a very powerful ability, so I can see this seeing play in some decks. Certainly I'd want to play it in limited, but I think that surveil ability may make it playable in Standard as well. Next, we've got 10 Street Gossip. For 2, a red and a green mana, you get a Viashino Advisor. It's a 4/4 with Vigilance. So nice body, nice ability of having Vigilance, but what makes the card, I think very playable in Standard is you can tap it to add a red and a green mana, and you can spend this mana only to cast face down spells or to turn creatures face up. So we've got our disguise ability, we've got our cloak ability. This is a card that was meant to work in a deck centered around them. So this is definitely going to be something we're going to see in Standard, because people are going to try to make those cards work, and this is an enabler of that strategy as a good way to reduce that cost of those creatures being flipped. Next, we've got Toxin Analyst. For a black mana, you get an instant, and target creature gains death touch and lifelink until the end of turn, and you get to investigate. So this is a good card for limited, certainly, and I think there's potentially some playability in Standard because there's a lot of value here. You get to basically kill something, gain some life, and then also investigate. And for 1 mana, that's a lot coming in a very small package. So I think, at least maybe as a sideboard option, some of our black decks are going to want to consider this. Next, we have Soul Enervation. For 3 and a black mana, you get an enchantment with flash, and when Soul Enervation enters the battlefield, target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn, and whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So another card that is along that same line, where we gain a life and your opponent loses life if a card leaves your graveyard. So I think that side of the card makes it interesting. The 4 mana does make it hard to play in Standard, but I think this is definitely a limited card I'd want to be considering, especially if you're using a collect evidence deck. Next, we've got our last 2 cards of the day with Breakout and Reasonable Doubt. So Breakout is in Gruul colors with a red and a green mana. You get a sorcery. You get to look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them. If that card has mana value 2 or less, you may put it onto the battlefield, and it gains haste until end of turn. If you didn't put the reveal card onto the battlefield this way, put it in your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, 2 mana, dig for 1st through 6 cards, get a creature. If it's a 2 mana or less, you can put it right on the battlefield to immediately affect the board state. So I like the card, potentially as a card that might grow in that Gruul deck, because we want to be digging for the right cards in Standard. And Definitely in limited, I definitely want to play with this if I'm playing the Gruul colors and I've got the card, because this is going to help me get to the best cards in my deck. Next, we've got our last card of the day, Reasonable Doubt. For 1 and a blue mana, you get an instant, and you get to counter target spell unless the controller pays 2. Now, we've got a couple of other cards just like this in Standard, but this one has the added benefit of you get to suspect up to 1 target creature when you cast the spell. So I like this as, maybe an alternative in the right deck to a Make Disappear. So we'll kind of see where it fits, but the fact that it can counter anything if its controller can't pay those 2 mana, I think is a nice ability in Standard. And again, that ability to get this to suspect a creature is very helpful to you as well. You can make it so their best creature can't block because it's going to have that menace, and it doesn't have the ability to block anymore. So that could be a game changer in Standard. So I think this has got definitely Standard playability, and I would definitely want to play it in Limited. All right, so those are the best cards from day 8 of Murders at Karlov Manor. Thanks for staying to the end of the video. And remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout the rest of Murders at Karlov Manor spoiler season. And we'll be doing some list videos in the coming days for top 10 cards, top 15, something like that. And then we'll be doing some of that also for lower rarity stuff as well. So thanks for staying to the end of the video, and you can take a look at our previous couple of Murders at Karlov Manor spoiler videos by clicking on the links provided. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.